Hello everyone and welcome to the Apigee online meetup spring edition. My name is Kiki and I'll be your host for today. We are broadcasting live from Google London headquarters and we are very happy to have you joining our conversation today. Backed by popular demand, today marks our 5th Apigee online meetup and we want to make this session as interactive and educational as possible. Today, we're going to have a session with Google Cloud and the Telegraph, and we're going to talk about data, ML, APIs, and the future of news. So we're going to kick off with the introduction and welcoming our guests and speakers to the stage, followed by a little conversation about data, ML, and APIs, and why this is critical for the modern enterprise. After that, we're going to hear the story of the Telegraph and how the Telegraph is delivering personalized news at a global scale with Google Cloud. Finally, we're going to have a fireside chat. As always, we're going to have plenty of opportunities for you to participate and ask questions. So, just a reminder, please do ask questions throughout the session. We are going to have a dedicated time to cover all your questions, so please feel free to submit them at any time. And to ask questions, you can either use the link shown here or click on the Ask Question button on your watch page. I would like now to welcome to the stage our guests, so Lucian, Head of Technology for Platform, and Dylan, Technology Director, both from the Telegraph. And from Google Cloud, Ollie, our Head of Digital Strategy, and Megan, Enterprise Business Manager. So now, without further ado, grab a drink, make yourself comfortable, and let's get started. Over to you, Ollie.
Thank you very much, Kiki, and good morning, everybody. In this online meetup, we're going to be talking about some critical capabilities for the modern digital enterprise. And we're going to be covering quite a lot of technical products and services from Google Cloud. So first of all, let's just get a sense of that landscape of what we're going to cover. So if you start on the top left, we're going to be talking about collaboration. And many of our customers are leveraging G Suite and Google Search Cloud so that they're bringing data to their employees wherever they are, whatever device that they're using, so that they can experience the same collaborative culture as Google Cloud. Secondly, being able to, as a business, create new business models and participate with partners leveraging Apigee and leveraging APIs. And then in a very competitive landscape that most businesses find themselves in, it's critical that you can create unique customer experiences, enabling your engineers to focus on value rather than infrastructure. So we'll see the Telegraph talking about Firestore and Cloud Functions, classic serverless applications and products within Google Cloud. We'll also be touching on Kubernetes, enabling an organization to containerize and orchestrate those containers and be able to be a multi-cloud organization and be able to orchestrate these containers from on-prem to any public cloud provider. And then predicting business outcomes. So critical for business today, being able to leverage data, being able to ingest it at scale, be able to create insight from it, and be able to democratize that to your business. And we'll see the Telegraph touching on technologies such as BigQuery. And then finally, obviously, all of this is built on Google's infrastructure. So leveraging Google's scale and security and defense in depth, so that as an organization you can focus on building your unique software and services whilst having that confidence of that scale and security. So why is this important to me? We're going to be touching specifically on machine learning to improve critical aspects of the business. Most businesses need to be better at this today. Personalization, ties back into that point I was making about the importance of delivering really unique experiences for your end customers wherever they are and whatever device they're using. The Telegraph is a fantastic case study of being a data-driven organization. So, mastering data, driving insight from that data, and then any business team can leverage that data at scale. Mature execution. We're going to be exploring data lakes, using BigQuery in the cloud, DevOps and SRE, and a fabulous tool chain to empower the engineers within the Telegraph. And finally, multi-channel. I think what's really interesting here is that it's not just web and mobile. The Telegraph leverage a proliferation of channels to connect with their readers. These are fantastic foundational building blocks for the modern digital enterprise. I'm looking forward to it. Over to Lucci and Dylan.
Thank you. So my name's Dylan Jacks, and I'm Technology Director at the Telegraph. I'm going to talk you through a few examples of how the Telegraph has leveraged the power of machine learning, the Google Cloud Platform, and the Apigee infrastructure to really deliver some of those business outcomes. So for those of you who don't know, the Telegraph is one of the UK's biggest quality newspapers. We've been around for a long time, so 164 years. But throughout that time, we've always been the forefront of digital innovation. So in 1994, we were the first news company in the UK to have a website. And since then, we've continued to innovate, adopting voice-based platforms, using new channels like Snap, but as I'll talk you through, really investing in that underpinning data infrastructure to really ensure that we move to that modern data-driven business. So, how do we leverage the data in the newsroom? One of the challenges that I think a lot of organisations face is not only how do you build up your data assets, but actually how do you get people to use them? So one of the techniques that we adopted was we built a 40-foot dashboard which we put right in the centre of the office, which all of our staff, and particularly our journalists, see. So this is very much at the forefront and putting data right at the front of the day-to-day operations of our newsroom. Now, a lot of these insights are available in real time, and that's particularly key for us, as obviously our journalists having to react to news trends and breaking news events. It's particularly key. They can see in real time how the content that they produce is performing. So obviously, it's not enough just to have, in my opinion, very slick design and very appealing dashboards, but it's all about the quality of the data that goes into them. And we've managed to leverage both the API infrastructure that Apigee offers, but also the Google Cloud Platform to tag our content as it's produced and surface how that content is performing in a very real-time way. So all of our journalists and everyone in the company, in fact, has access to various pieces of content, and the Telegraph operates with a hybrid model. So a big proportion of our content is open and designed to bring scale and is free for everybody to consume. A proportion of it we require a registration, and a proportion of it we require people to pay for. Now, we have different strategies in the types of content that we position behind those into that model. So what we need to ensure is when we produce a piece of content, is it performing and is it appealing to that audience? And to do that, we need to analyse a huge amount of data points, historical data, understand how certain content is performing across social, and there are millions and millions of impressions, page views, and users that we have to constantly evaluate how that content is connecting with that audience. So we do all of that in real time, and we surface it using these dashboards here. but it's also about how that content connects to our strategy. So we are a subs first business, so everything that we produce, we're very keen that we focus it on the engagement and really is it connecting with that subscriber base. And obviously people use a variety of different ways to consume that content, so we have to understand, is this piece of news, is this content connecting well with people on particular devices? Is it working well in particular regions? And as we grow our subscriber base internationally, it's very important that we see how particular bits of content that we're producing is appealing geographically. And one of the other ways in which we've leveraged machine learning is forecasting actually not only how our content has performed, but potentially how could it perform. So what we do is we analyse based on a huge number of data points how very similar articles had performed previously. So therefore we can then see this is how the content is performing at this time of day, but actually a very similar article with very similar traits actually performed either higher or lower. So then we can take action on where we position that content to get the most out of it. But also the reality is that not everybody is spending their days looking at dashboards. So a big part of our infrastructure is how can we proactively alert journalists to respond to breaking news trends. So, somebody might be in a meeting, but a huge event might break. Our products are analysing that this event is actually outside of a normal news cycle threshold. So it alerts our teams to say, okay, you now need to respond to this. Or a particular piece of content might be massively connecting with an audience, or it could be underperforming. So we therefore need to have an alerts-driven, API-driven platform that connects people to that. So this is the plumbing that feeds the data into our dashboards, and there's a few familiar icons on there from the Google stack. So one example, we take raw feeds from multiple different analytics sources. We consume this data using Google Consumers and the Kubernetes products. We then use data flow to actually make sense of the data and transform it. And then we use the rest of the platform to present that to the dashboard. So the next example I'm going to talk you through is how we use ML to support our print business. So the print business is not an area that typically is associated with lots of technical innovation, and one of the things that we need to focus on is wastage. So we circulate our newspaper to 40,000 distribution points every single day. And the reality is that the newspaper is very much a key part of our product base and is really the main thrust of how people are consuming news day to day at the moment. But the problem is, obviously, we're inherent with a print product. We don't get a huge amount of data back as to how people are consuming it, whether if we send newspapers to certain distribution points, are all of them being purchased. Often we don't find that out until it's too late to do anything about it. So we then expose ourselves to a bit of risk. So we could send too many newspapers to one area of the country and too little to another. Now, this is a huge problem for us because not only does it cause wastage, but it also means that a customer, might not be able to get access to a product that they've paid for. And it also introduces huge overheads, not to mention environmental concerns as to how we then try and recycle and deal with all of those wasted copies. So at the Telegraph, our data teams looked at, right, how could we reduce that waste and leverage ML to not only reduce the number of unsold copies that we have to deal with, but also maximum optimize our ability to sell these newspapers. So one of the things that we have started to do is using Google's ML is to actually forecast how many newspapers we send to each region. So every single day, it calculates how many newspapers were sold from a region and how many were left over. And it automatically optimizes and learns every day the optimum level of newspapers we need to send. The other benefit of ML, particularly in this scenario, is that previously this was done fairly manually. Therefore, it was always based on the historical, its sort of numerical number of papers that were returned. ML gives us the opportunity to start to feed in other data points into that. So we could consider weather, we could consider the news agenda, we could consider any number of different data points that might inform how and optimize how that model works. So feeding those data sources in and using the power of ML, collectively we're able to massively improve our availability, but also significantly reduce wastage. So using these deep learning tools and advancing this model, we've been able to realise over £1 million worth of savings in the course of a year. The final example I'm going to talk through is how we use ML to position our products to our customers in our paywall. So when you access our content, and if it's behind either a registration or a paywall, we want to make sure that that paywall and that the gate that you come across is very tailored and extremely specific to your interests, because this maximizes the likelihood that you will convert and take out a full subscription. So the reality is that there are a very broad and varied base of interests, and people all want a different thing from their subscription. So what we've done is we've experimented with understanding of very broad variations in the types of paywalls and products that we can sell you, and we use machine learning to understand exactly what we think is going to best connect with you. So these are some of the examples of the different products and executions that we sell. Some of them only very subtly different, but actually what we found is when using ML to do this, and particularly at scale, very small improvements mean huge returns to us in the long term. And also, very similar to the print model that I talked through, the ML process gives us the ability to feed lots of other data sources in and allow the machine, based on all of these data sources, to massively optimize what we think exactly the right product is for you, based on your browsing habits, based on a huge variety of inputs. And further than that, it's not just about the product that you're likely to click on. We want our customers to stay with us for the longest amount of time. So in recent times, we have moved from not just an ML-driven paywall that's optimized for click, but a paywall that is optimized to show you a product that you're most likely to stay with for the longest period of time. And to do that, we work out what the lifetime value of that customer is, and we make sure that our paywall execution is completely optimized for the lifetime value. And just by switching to that model that focuses on the long-term benefits of the customer, we've been able to further increase the benefit to us by almost 8%, which translates to about £200,000 in additional revenue just on that optimization alone per year. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Luci.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Luci. I'm head of technology for platforms and head of engineering at the Telegraph. My team is building some of the core APIs that power some sections of our website and our mobile apps, and also managing the infrastructure. What I want to talk about is multi-channel and personalization. So, as Dylan mentioned, up until 2016, we had a print edition, a website, digital edition, and an app. And after that, then the number of platforms we are present on actually exploded. we are present on both web or visual platforms and also audio. So having a good API strategy has helped a lot with that. Just to be clear, APIs are not a silver bullet. They don't work for everything. Some of these channels do require like their own content management system, and the content for them, it's harder to be automated. But for most of our platforms, using API has allowed us to automate the content delivery. And taking things a step further, we have decided to personalize the news feed on some of these platforms, like the website and the digital edition, and I would like to talk about that. So one of our company goals is to grow our number of registered users to 10 million in the next few years. And to support our goal, but also to provide a better experience for our registered users, we set out to create My Telegraph. And My Telegraph is a personalized feed of articles driven by APIs. Now, the requirements were make it fast and easy for registered users to discover and engage with relevant content. What does that mean? So fast means that we want real-time alerts. When a piece of content of news is being published and someone is interested in that topic, they should get a real-time alert. Easy means that all the users should have one place across multiple devices to get their personalized feed. Registered means we will be able to provide this feature for our registered users because we will need to know what their preferences is, and we need to know those users. Discover and engage means that all users are able to follow a topic or an author, and relevant means they should be able to see the feed with the content they had choose to follow. Looking at the architecture diagram, we have 3 APIs that power this. We have a feed API, a preferences API, and an alerter API. So how does this work? One of the biggest challenges we had with the requirements was that we had to deliver real-time alerts on multiple devices. And real-time is hard to do, right? So, and it would have required a lot of time and effort on our engineering team. So we set out to actually find a better solution. And Firestore is the solution we chosen. So how does this work? So the moment you load the Telegraph homepage, there's a call made to the Preferences API to get that user's preferences. It all goes through the Apigee platform. The browser gets the preferences and then registers them with Firestore. Now, when a user clicks on their feed, there's another call sent to the My Telegraph feed API, and the user will get the feed automatically. And lastly, when a new piece of content is being published, the alerter API will actually send the metadata for that article to Firestore, and Firestore will automatically alert the users that are interested in that topic or that author. And also, I would like to talk about our engineering culture and tech stack. So please engage with us. Go to engineering.telegraph.co.uk. You'll find our latest blogs and everything, and our engineering culture and everything there. So please engage with us there. So, and our viewers will say, well, look, you have built all these great products, but then who is Telegraph Engineering? Who is behind all of these technologies? So our engineering culture is based on accountability, transparency, and trust. our motto is you build it, you run it, you own it. So I think everybody knows about DevOps. Lately, it seems that most of people have to have that in their job title. So I will actually talk a little bit about, just in case not everybody knows about it. So DevOps is a set is a culture, is a set of principles that allow a company to progress faster. We set out to implement some of this principle maybe 4 years ago, and we started with an experiment. We embedded one of our system engineers into one of the development teams, and that experiment really worked very well. And we started to do that more because DevOps it's about the collaboration between devs and ops. It's definitely not something you you have to do. It's mostly a collaboration between teams. So at the moment we have mixed teams of system engineers and software engineers working together towards the same goal. Now, these principles are usually implemented differently in different companies. So, for example, for Google, the implementation is called site reliability engineering, and we have our own implementation of that. So we implement some of the DevOps principles in our own way, but we also implement some of them in the SRE way. So for example, one of the DevOps principles is actually to reduce silos inside the company. And the Google SRE best practices say that to reduce silos, you have to empower developers and also use a set of common tools and practices across your stack and across your teams. So given that, I'm going to talk about the technologies and tools we are using at the Telegraph. So quickly, we keep everything in GitHub. There's Jenkins at the middle of everything that actually builds the code, Dockerizes it, and deploys it to our multi-cloud platform. We have Slack and PagerDuty for alerts. We use Datadog for monitoring, Elasticsearch for logging. And on top of all our APIs, we have our API management platform, which is Apigee. Going forward, I would also like to talk about some new design patterns we are using to build our APIs. These are all driven by our brilliant architecture team. So one of the main patterns is API contract-driven development, and this was one of the big patterns that saved us a lot of time, and means that you have a contract or a Swagger file, and you spin up a mock or a stub out of that, and all the teams develop and test against that. There's no more friction between the teams, and the teams are allowed to progress independently. Another pattern is backend for frontend. We touch a little bit on multi-channel, and backend for frontend allowed us to actually create APIs and microservices specific for each channel we want to be present on. Another one is making all the APIs public from the start. In the past we had APIs that were both private and public with different endpoints or host names, or just private, and then suddenly they had to become public. So we wanted to go simple, and everything is public from now on. And I've also touched before on using some of the SRE principles, and we have added several service level indicators and service level objectives in our NFRs as mandatory. So I think that's me, and I'm back to Kiki.
All right. Thank you so much for the discussion. And now let's take a moment and check the questions from the audience. Just a reminder, to ask questions, you can use the link shown here or click on the button Ask Question on your watch page. All right. So the first question comes from Nicola. How have teams embraced new ways of working and new technologies?
So probably take that. So at the Telegraph, we have a really open culture, and we embraced smart working, and we embraced using cutting-edge technologies. So it was really easy for us because it was in our culture to actually be able to, I don't know, remote work or maybe use new technologies that we haven't used before, and such as, I don't know, maybe I'll give an example. Kubernetes was one of them. I mean, the team was really, really excited when we said we want to start using that to actually manage our containers, and everybody was happy to learn and to progress.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Luci. So I think one of the other benefits that I've certainly seen outside of technology as well is that since we've adopted a data lake strategy, a lot of our organizational data is now all in a place where we've made it very easy and accessible for any team in the Telegraph to access. So by that, we've seen now we've reduced that barrier. We've seen a much better adoption of data and people using the tools within the cloud platform to analyze and actually produce reporting based on the data in the lake.
Thank you very much. So the next question from Roberto. How do you create this open culture, not technically?
Well, maybe I should have saved my answer from the previous question for this. But you know, I think, well, from a data point of view, just to expand on that previous point, you know, having access, everybody having access to data and tools, you know, Kubernetes as well is now an open source product, and it's just something that lots of people are very interested and want to get involved with, and also the Google Cloud platform is a broad selection of products. So people have a certain amount of freedom to use different parts of that to support their use case. It's much less prescriptive, so technology telling people to do this, you have to use these 3 tools to achieve it. There is a lot of breadth in the platform, so I think that really contributes to a much more open culture.
And actually, Dylan, you touched on something which I thought was really quite interesting, which was around that sort of iterative style, so demonstrating business impact. So I think to the business stakeholders, in fact, the broader community within the business, I think is a really nice idea of encouraging that culture to permeate.
Absolutely, yeah. If you can reduce the barrier to the tools and give everybody access, then you know you're absolutely right. People can start to just get their hands on data, start to use it in very small, iterative ways, and then because you've got the breadth within the platform that goes from just using tables worth of data and visualizing it right the way through to a proper ML or AI driven mentality, people can very incrementally get there, which I think is important.
And it's, if I may add, it's not necessarily only about tools, right? It's also about teams. So empowering the teams and encouraging them to actually embrace change is really important. And also, because we're talking about cloud here, accepting failure is really important, right? So failing is not a bad thing. Failing means you have to learn. So my boss always says it's okay to fail, but not twice, right? So not twice on the same problem. So I think that's really important to enforce that it's in the cloud. Everything will fail. It's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when, right? So you have to embrace that design for that and scale for that.
Great. Thank you very much. Very insightful. Now we're coming to our fireside chat. So Megan, over to you.
Sure. So thank you again to Dylan and Lucci for joining us today. So for some, leveraging ML within their business seems like a distant reality. What have you learned over your kind of journey of implementing ML for the Telegraph? What are kind of the key foundations?
Yeah, so I guess I can take this one. So part of the example I talked through earlier, where we used Google Cloud Platform to support our print business. When we first started that project, it was about getting the data available, then understanding how we can interpret that to forecast our newspapers. Mm-hmm. And we didn't start certainly with an ML model from day one. We started by just using very, very basic predictive tools that almost just simulated how our current manual forecasting happened. So starting as small as possible. And then once we'd established that and we'd sort of automated the current process using very basic techniques, we then expanded that to a much more ML-driven approach and tried to beat the previous model using increasingly more sophisticated means. So by working in that way, you're not trying to get to the golden solution straight out of the gate. People are achieving things as they go through it, and you're learning much more about the process and the data that you're dealing with. So I guess my answer is, start very small. You don't have to use ML immediately, but have it in mind as a vision, and and if you just follow a process, the more you know about it, I think it will give you that scale once you've got to a certain level of maturity.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. Lucci, Dylan, what have been some of the reasons why the Telegraph chose Google Cloud?
I think we probably mentioned before, but we have a long-standing relationship with Google, right? So we were one of the first companies to actually adopt Gmail maybe more than 10 years ago. And then the data team started to use BigQuery for the data lake more than 4 years ago. And slowly, we adopted more and more Google technologies, for example, Kubernetes, and we didn't find any other better place to have Kubernetes as a service. So I think it really made sense for us at this point to move most of our workloads into Google.
Cool. I think many organizations struggle with the quality of their data and indeed the volume of their data. In using BigQuery and other GCP products, how has this helped you kind of build the tools to allow your teams to extract insights from that data?
Yeah, so I think one of the downsides in having very accessible and scalable data platforms is it can quite quickly sort of become the Wild West in the respect that people start to lose track of, why is this there? What do we use this for? Was it there for development purposes? Yeah. And it's very important that you have the governance around, what that data is actually designed to do. What was that data flow contract put in place to do, and what are the business rules? Because quickly people start to view that data as the truth, and then if there are differing pictures, it causes organizational problems. So one of the best practice tools that I think Google have developed is the concept of almost a data catalog to go alongside the data that's in the lake, that has very clear rules and descriptions that track in and out. Why is this data here? What purpose is it there to provide? Who has access to it? Who has changed it? And I think it's a very basic thing, but a very, very important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lucci, what have been some of the benefits of a core platform of APIs? And for example, are things like developer portals something of interest to the organization?
Sure. So historically, we had several teams building building APIs for the Telegraph, and they would be doing their own authentication and authorization. They would be, I don't know, keeping documentation or I don't know, the access to the keys in their own on their own side. So I think that was really difficult at Telegraph to find what are the available as APIs, what can I use to actually build the product. So having one platform on top of all our APIs has helped that a lot. I think, and we are currently working on a developer portal that will have a list of all our APIs, and then anybody at the Telegraph can go say, look, these are my available APIs. That's where the documentation is. That's where the endpoint is. And one of the most important things is that those teams will be able to self-service with API keys to test it.
Great.
Which is actually something that will encourage them to build new products and progress faster.
Great. Now, you've conveyed a very mature digital team. Where does the world of product ownership fit in this world, and how do you own and manage all these different channels of engagement versus like the core services that underpin those channels?
So at the Telegraph, we have product owners for all the channels, and those product people will actually own the microservice or the API specific to that channel. But then the core APIs that are powering all these platforms, they are owned by the heads of departments and the CTO.
And what would be a head of department at the Telegraph? What would you own?
So in the platform teams, in the platform team, I own the content API, for example.
Okay, great, thanks.
Cool. So I'm guessing within a news organisation, you must have demands from your users who want to break their stories first. So what are some of the things that you have built from a software and services perspective to help your journalists?
Well, obviously, we're a breaking news organisation, so sort of as standard, we have to have services that can scale according to that demand. So, you know, we're very familiar with the sort of peaks and troughs of traffic, and we're always evaluating how we can respond to that.
Yeah.
I gave some examples of, you know, from an actual product point of view, how we can inform our journalists to react to those news events. But obviously, you know, maybe Luci's better qualified to talk about the architecture and the elements that we put in to protect the production services if we see like major spikes.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think I'm known as the cache guy at the Telegraph, right? So I solve all the problems with cache, and that's not always a bad thing. But so what actually allows us to scale really easy is the use of CDNs. And origin cache, and that protects our APIs and our website against spikes of traffic.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Great. So I love that timeline of the Telegraph with all those different platforms and audio channels. Now, channel agility has caught out, I think, many businesses. You know, many I think are still talking about becoming mobile first, but actually, you know, it's about the unknown channels of engagement where your users may be wanting to participate. How do you evaluate a new potential channel before making that kind of commitment that is something that you're going to own, live, and breathe?
So I think this evaluation it has changed together with the company strategy. And a few years ago, we had a different strategy. We were actually looking for page views. And then that meant that we should be on as many channels as possible. And as the company strategy has changed to a subscription model, now we are evaluating new channels as from a point of view where they can help with our registration and subscription strategy. So building that specific API for that channel will only happen if that channel is going to help the company with the current strategy.
Great. Now, all these channels could make a journalist's life much harder. So how do you encourage this proliferation of channels whilst also keeping the journalists' lives relatively simple?
So again, APIs come to save us here. So all our content goes into our content API. And then, so the moment it's published, from there it can be pushed to every channel automatically without any extra work from on the journalist side. Of course, it's for the channels that support that, and it's not all the channels.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So Luci, you touched upon DevOps earlier.
Yes.
And I think it's really important within most organizations, or all organizations now. And I think many companies are very heavily influenced by Google's SRE. What are some of the challenges that the Telegraph have faced when embracing SRE?
So I think some of the SRE best practices were really easy to implement, and they were actually seen as really helpful from the start, looking at service level indicators and service level objectives. That's something we've always wanted to do, and that's an SRE best practice. And also having error budgets, which you are actually encouraged to use. It's one of the practices that we want to use. I mean, we don't want to actually create downtime on purpose just because we have a budget.
Yeah.
But for example, that budget we can consume with releases, or with some kind of testing. So that was really easy to implement. But maybe there's some others that at the moment are really hard for us. Like, I know SREs have a toil budget. So the toil budget says that any SRE is supposed to be doing engineering work or development at least 50% of their time. Yeah. It's really hard for us at the moment. I think the current DevOps model, it's a bit more easier to adopt, as in having developers and system engineers working together. We're not there yet to actually have every member of the team contribute to the software. So maybe toil budgets are not for us at the moment.
Okay.
So I'm interested. You just mentioned sort of page views as a kind of a metric that you could have used, and I think in some of our conversations before we've talked about lifetime value. Just kind of interested in understanding, as you've gone on this journey, how you've perhaps evolved from like the immediacy of like very simple measurement like page views as a signal of success versus something like a longer term value of a reader.
Yes, so I mean, certain publications, see page views and that scale as their key metrics. They're very supported by advertising, but often those are much more vanity-based metrics. A lot of those views are just, they view it once and then you never see them again, and actually that doesn't necessarily translate into longer-term value for the business. So what we've been very conscious of is how we now engineer our products not to build that scale, but to actually, to operate as a funnel. So as we do gather people, because we do need a certain amount of scale to bring people into the ecosystem, but really focus our efforts on how we convert that scale into repeat engagement and value to a customer, and ultimately connect that customer with content that's specific for their interests, that they will be willing to pay for and come back and consume it again and again. And I think by adopting that approach and by making decisions that are always focused on the customer and their experience, that sets us up much more for the long term rather than just sort of short-term numerical objectives.
Great. Okay, thanks. So we're getting close to the end of the time, but perhaps one more question. I'm going to go back to that question from the audience around culture. Lucci, I mean, I don't know if you were there in those first conversations around failure, but just going back in time, talking to the news organisation, talking to the business, talking to the journalists about adapting for failure. How well did that go, and how did you kind of transition their confidence in what your approach was going forwards with the world of SRE, for example?
So failure it's always hard to accept, right? And I was talking about before caching and using CDNs, and that actually saved my job a couple of times. So as long as the users don't really see that the whole picture behind or the whole extent of the failure, I think it's easier to actually use your error budgets. And so the fact that the CDN is able to cache the content for several hours and the origin is taking just, I don't know, maybe 5% of that traffic, it's really helpful for us to be able to actually release and maybe do some experiments with A/B deployments maybe, or without actually having a full impact on all the channels.
Great. A great example. Thanks very much. All right. Kiki.
All right. So now we go to the Fireside chat takeaways.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, Lucci, Dylan, that was really, really insightful. Thanks very much. And I think what I've taken away is an appreciation of talking about and sharing like business impact, the actual tangible outcomes for both the stakeholders within the business and your readership. But also, I think for me, we've seen here an organisation that really is truly data-driven. I think that example of being iterative and demonstrating that value over time is really important. I think also that emphasis around lifetime value, I think, is really interesting. How often I think organisations chase lifetime value, and of course then delivering that insight, delivering that value from the data via APIs. So that's data-driven, and then I think second, machine learning at scale. I mean, this is fantastic examples of leveraging machine learning and kind of key aspects of how the business operates and seeing like business impact to the organisation. And then lastly, I think a nice taster there of the engineering culture. I think in this competitive landscape, having that engineering talent in-house is a key enabler. Leveraging that great tool chain so that the developers can focus on value and that spirit of accountability and ownership. So those are my key takeaways: data-driven, machine learning at scale, and that engineering culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that. It was really insightful. Now we're going to shift our discussion and get some more questions from the audience. So the first question is from Sharia. Can you give us a war story of a particular tough challenge in exposing the data within a legacy platform that was tough to hook into? I think it's for you.
I don't know about war story. I mean, the example that I talked through from the print side of the business was always challenging, because a lot of the data that's held within those print systems, some of it is, some of it's 20 years old, and when we started to look at it, a lot of it, the technology 20 years old was very proprietary. People had engineered very specific parts of data, and I don't need to labour the point of how far we've come since then. So we were having to look at data that was just completely in a foreign language. And what I would say is, don't be afraid to start again, because data is tables, rows, and how you interpret that. And actually, just because something's been like that for 20 years doesn't mean you can't touch it or you can't change it, just because the people obviously maybe have left the business since they started to use it. So we looked at that as a big challenge, but ultimately we started again and it was fine.
Great, thank you so much. So next question from Olena. How do you track new preference which your clients can develop? For example, a certain feed consists of news chosen on the basis of preferences. Do you also add some random news to test if they may be interesting for that particular user?
Yes, so I can take this one. So whenever we do any sort of test, there's always an element of control. So we see in that control, our model has to perform above that baseline, and that control will have a full spectrum of news within it. So that's how we prove whether or not our targeting is working. But really, the whole premise of a more ML-driven approach is it's constantly feeding in an infinite number of different combinations, and we're not necessarily thinking directly that, right, this user is interested in this thing. We are in some scenarios for specific reasons, but in the ML use case, we leave that purely down to the machine, and that's the beauty of it, because you have the scale. It's much more about all of the inputs that you feed it, and the machine ultimately just wants to understand, are you going to engage with it? Doesn't really care what those preferences are. It is all about, are you going to engage with it?
Great. Thank you so much. And the last question, how tightly should the data structures exposed by your APIs align with an enterprise data model view of your data?
I think I'll take this one. So, so the data structure, I think it exposed by the APIs. I think it depends on what that API is supposed to do, right? So for our content API, we have what we call UCM, a unified content model, that actually provides the most information available about that article or author or piece of content. And then we expose that via the content API, but that's one of the core APIs, right? So then all this data, the UCM, is then enriched and transformed by the microservice or the API specific to a specific channel. So depending on the API, the representation of the data, it can be actually very custom to that channel.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for your questions. We hope that you found that very interesting and helpful. And if you want to know more, please do visit our website. You'll be able to find there some interesting blog posts from the Telegraph and from Google Cloud. Also, we would love to hear your feedback. So please send us your ideas and suggestions through the feedback form that you can see the link on the screen. And also, very soon we will have our next edition of the Apigee online meetup in June 11. So keep tuned and please send your ideas. We want to make the next edition even better. With that, we're coming to the end of our session today. Thank you very much for joining and see you next time.